And I stayed also on the mud floor and under the feet of the Kali statue. And oh, there were rats, there were snakes, there were just everything. There was no light, there was no toilet, there was no water, nothing. It was wonderful, really.
My name is Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Conversations that explore depth, wisdom, and relationship. Today's guest is the scholar and yogic practitioner, Dr. Andrea Loseries. Andrea shares about her path of research and spiritual practice that stretches over more than 50 years. She tells stories about the darkness, insight, and devotion needed for genuine transformation. In 1972, you went to the Eastern Himalayas to study with great yogic masters. And I wanted to hear if you would share about this time. Like, were you looking for any teachers in particular? And how did you end up meeting the teachers you ended up studying with?
First, I ventured out to India in 71. And it was partly also to study some Indian art, because I was enrolled at the Louvre, Musée du Louvre, and my special subject was Asian arts at the Musée Guimet. So I was supposed to, go to Ajanta, see the Sanchi Stupa and all that, but it turned out differently. So I fell ill, got hepatitis. On my way back, I had to be hospitalized in Austria. And when I came back to Paris, it was closed, the admission, despite having a medical certificate and all that, it didn't help. And then I saw this advertisement for Langues Orientales, Oriental Language Institute at the Sorbonne, where they offered also Tibetan. And I already had, from hearsay, contact with the Karmapa, my guru, right? So I decided that I cannot expect at the age of 19 that the Karmapa now, a father figure will learn English. So it's better that I learn Tibetan. And because I thought it's absolutely a necessity to be able to communicate with him. So I enrolled in Tibetan studies, but I had to complete my studies in Paris. So after that academic year, only I had the chance to go back to India. And there in Paris, before going to India, shortly before that, Chatral Rinpoche came and gave refuge and Zenrezi initiation and so on. And that was my actual getting in touch physically with this Tibetan culture. But then I was quite convinced that my guru, Chatral Rinpoche was, of course, one of my most important teachers, but my root guru is only the Karmapa. So then I sought him out in Sikkim. That was also not easy, because the first time I went, he was not there, because that was the time when the king of Bhutan has passed away, and he was there for the funeral. He was away for, I think, more than a month he was in Bhutan. And in those days, it was not open for foreigners. So I had to come back another time. It was all very complicated in those days. It was still a separate kingdom, right? It was not yet integrated in the Indian continent. So anyway, that's how it was. It was very clear from the very outset, and it's so classical that I don't really like to talk about it, because it's like a fairy tale, like what you read in novels. When I came, then the Karmapa sitting there in all his glory saying, "Oh, I've waited for you," like that. When I actually met him physically, I had so many visions and dreams about him. So I was quite, was not a big surprise. to be in his actual presence. And I was with colleagues from the university, from Paris. And we were all there in this audience hall, and he spoke. And they were all studying also with me Tibetan language. We were at the same level. Then he spoke, and then he pointed at me and he said, "And you translate." And I really don't know how, but I have understood what he said. So that was my introduction also to, to have to serve as a translator as well. And then I went to Sikkim as often as possible. I always had an application for a visa running. It took 6 months, and with permission of first the Foreign Ministry, then the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And meanwhile, I had shifted from Paris to Shantiniketan in India to continue my Tibetan studies there and be closer to Sikkim and also to Darjeeling, where Chatral Rinpoche was teaching, because Karmapa himself, he did not really teach, right, formally. And so we were sent to other teachers. So he sent most of his students, he sent to Chatral Rinpoche to study. So I was also there in this very intimate circle of very few people, which were just a handful. There were, of course, no good translators at that time, so we struggled and did our Ngöndro, our preliminaries, and, taught the basics. But we learned that at the feet of the Guru, right? In very simple circumstances, in that small village, in this very tiny monastery at that time. Now it's bigger and everything. No? I wondered when I see now all these teachings you can buy, you can look that up in the internet. Everything is there in the internet. You can buy the books and everything is there, but it does not have the same flair. This was a very precious time. I'm still in contact with some of my fellow Vajra sisters and brothers of that particular period.
So it sounded like before you met the Karmapa in person, you knew about him, and you had already taken him as your root teacher. Is that right? From what you're sharing?
Yes.
How did you, if you're willing to share, how was it that you came in contact with him and decided he was your teacher prior to meeting him?
Well, I saw a picture of him. I heard about him. I touched something which he has touched, and somehow I was only 19, but I knew in my heart that's what I was looking for in my life. So there was never any doubt. And the Karmapa himself also, he told me that I am always near him in the past, in the present, and in the future. So it's like that.
And so during this time, 1971, and then this period after, it sounds like you were between studying and practicing, and studying language and practicing. Were those the main two parts of your life during that time?
Yeah. No, first I started. And I spent as much time as possible there in the hills, in Darjeeling. But at the same time, I did my studies. I always wanted to combine it in studies, and it was very important for me. Later on, I realized when I did then my PhD in Vienna, it gave me this important distance, right? Because you can be carried away by your devotion and also a certain amount of naivete, in dealing with Tibetan culture and all its aspects. And to study the history and to read the text and all that, that was very essential. That I don't take everything for granted what the lamas teach. And I then started to translate for the lamas. No? So I had a certain distance, which was also important. At the same time, I was unshaken in my devotion. But it was a devotion based on also proper insight and touch from my part. I never regretted it to have gone into academic studies. I thought it was very important. Although it's not that you gain much bread with Tibetan and Buddhist studies, but that's what I wanted. No? And that was a generation at the time where one did not look at all regarding income or making money. And that did not interest me anyway. Nowadays, the times are very different. They're very much, unfortunately, very much hunting after the mammon. We didn't do that. I belonged to this hippie generation where we did not believe in possessions at all, you know. When the Karmapa took me along in on his first world tour, that then changed because that was a completely different world I came into. It was very unusual. It's still, for me, even after all these many years, not quite clear that His Holiness in his omniscience just said to me, that is a funny encounter. Actually, I've never spoken about that. Once I come into his, and he was having I had to laugh immediately because he was wearing headphones and he looked so funny. But there were not headphones. He said, "Oh, the king of Bhutan gave it to me. It's for protecting my ears because I'm going on an airplane. I'm going to America. And the king gave it to me I don't know, protection of the ears." So anyway, it was very funny. And then suddenly he said, "You know many languages, and I want that you come along." And then he immediately called one of the monks, and he said, her name must be on the list. Could not quite realize what was happening, you know. And then indeed, you know, I was 6 months in North America and in Europe before returning to India. And that was for me the most important time of my life.
Were there other particular details of that time, of those 6 months, that stay with you when you reflect?
I came from Sonada, where I stayed in a room, in a shack with no electricity, no water, no toilet, nothing. And then I come into this environment of the Karmapa and started with a fancy restaurant somewhere in Manhattan. And then we always had this VVIP reception. I still keep this tags from the luggage, VVIP party we were. And everywhere there was champagne receptions, which of course I could take, but not the monks. And we met all these important people everywhere, the mayors and presidents and whatnot, you know. So it was a completely different level. And the Karmapa was also quite strict regarding my appearance. So I had to be always very elegant. And mostly he wanted to have me in Tibetan dress to show the culture also. I would say that it sounds funny, but I sort of started being rather a village girl, you know, studying there in the Himalayas, and I returned as a lady. And these 6 months we experienced to be like 6 years. And this constant presence of the Karmapa was, of course, overshadowing everything. He was like the sun. To be always there with him was absolutely extraordinary, but it was also very exhausting. It was very exhausting because we had all these head ceremonies and with these initiations and this and that, and always something going on. There was never any time to meditate. No? When I then returned to India and also to Kolkata with the Karmapa, the monks wanted me to go to Nepal for this ancient Tetsu initiation, which is another, I don't know, 2 months or what. No? But I had completely enough, always these crowds of people and always this, and I said, no, Then I bid farewell to the Karmapa and said, I want to go to the cremation ground because I need to meditate. That was too much for me, all these blessings, I had no time to digest. And then Karmapa said, that's all right. You will meet there disciples of from previous lives. But if you go there, you have to go there in my name and challenge the sadhus there. So I had no idea what does he mean with that. No? Chatral Rinpoche also said, well, you have to challenge. You have to challenge. So anyway, I was not given any more explanations regarding that. I had to find it out on my own. And that's what I did. And some of the monks, they said, how come you did miss this important initiation and you should have been there? This is part of the transmission. But I didn't feel like it. Till now, I'm not really keen on these big assemblies. I had enough of that.
I wanted to ask you, just kind of going into some of your research, specifically in your Tibetan Mahayana Tantra book, you speak about the two kinds of bun and the fruition bun that came from Iran to Tibet, also known as the ancient kingdom of Zhangzong, which had its own language and culture and was not part of Tibet until the 8th century.
This is part of the burn studies. I mean, we speak of Tunpa Miwo Shenrab, and I have been quite associated with Burnpo masters like Tenzin Namtak and also Tenzin Wangyal. And he has a settlement in the US and he is promoting burn religion, if you call it a religion, and burn studies. So it is well researched. It was not, I mean, there was in the ancient times in Tibet, before they came out into exile, they did not have much contact and it was not well known. It was overpowering the Buddhist culture in Tibet. But when they came out, particularly thanks to the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he accepted the burn as even the fifth order of Tibetan Buddhism, which is extraordinary. No? And if one reads the history, from the burn side, the history, in the Tibetan historians often distorted very much the history for the benefit of the Buddhists. So what we read by Tibetan historians, Buddhist historians, is not always very accurate. And when you then hear the Rinpo historian speaking, that gives a different picture, right? Starting from the very beginning. And also it is very much underplayed the role of the Burn ministers had, even at the time of Padmasambhava and so on. No? When one studies then this, we also call the actual burn or the high burn, right? That is very much is that it has all the characteristics of an enlightened teaching, like the Buddha's teaching. And you may say the burn historians then matched their history or their legends with the Buddhist and so on, so whatever, But it is certainly the burn did have great influence on Tibetan Buddhist culture as well. So it should not be neglected.
In 1981, you received your doctorate, but this is correct, originally focused on bone carving, which later widened, include skulls and relics and iconography. Is that correct?
Yes, more or less, yeah. Right.
Well, I thought we could start, if you're willing to share the origin story of bone ornaments as garments of joyous and wrathful deities.
The bones,
Yeah, in connection with the manifestation of Chakra Sambhara.
We find that in all Buddhist tantras, it's usually always the same. Then you vanquish an enemy. When you're victorious over an enemy, you take over his office, right? And that's what, I mean, it's very much a tribal custom. There are a lot of tribal elements in the tantras anyway. He took up the ornaments, including the tiger skin, the weapons and all that from his enemies, from which he had slaughtered. Isn't it? That's how it's written in the story, in the legend, which is always in the beginning of a tantra. It's mythological, of course.
Mm-hmm. Well, you wrote also in the same book of yours Tibetan Mahayoga Tantra. You wrote Skull and Bones or Animistic, live, endowed with power. A good yogi of Mahayoga Tantra will use such objects with care and in accordance with his inner power. And you mentioned the story with Namgyal Ronge that he gave you a skull in 1987 on what you noted as a legendary snow lion expedition, and which was later taken from you, in which you say hindered your worldly and spiritual development. Can you say more on this, both how the skull impacted your life and how that is possible, the influence from the skull?
Well, it was a very special skull. It was absolute nonsense, really. It was bad. It was a one piece, not one part. What was the Dumbuchikpa we call it? It was a very special skull which he found in the market and he gave it to me. And I used it during the whole expedition. I always used it as a ritual instrument and whatnot. And then when we came back to Nepal, we had to walk because of the landslide. He was having a lot of artifacts which he had bought in Tibet and which he had to take care of. So he sent me off and gave me some of his treasures to carry over the border. And I had, of course, as usual, it was just one bag. I had in that bag, I always had this skull, you know. Then when I crossed the border, they searched the bag. They didn't find something else which I had hidden in my clothes. But I did not even think of it. They found the skull. And they confiscated it, these bastards. Really. And the problem is, I said, it was bought in Nepal. You're bringing it back to Nepal. But what I should have done in those days was that when you entered Nepal overland, then you had to make a list of all the things you have. And then you can take these things out again, which I don't know. I did not think about it. So they confiscated my skull. That's very bad, very bad. And it did affect, yes, it had a bad effect in many ways. Yeah, in my personal life. And it was an obstacle, a big obstacle. It took me quite some time to get over that. And I attribute it to the loss of that skull.
Was there anything you did when you realized that that was what was creating obstacles for you? Were there certain practices or certain things you did to try to...
You do what you can, but the fact is that you have obstacles, you have to overcome them and you struggle. So in general, one should be, with one ritual objects, one should be very careful. And as I have pointed out, and for instance, you don't let other people touch your ritual objects, even your mala, or your ornaments, whatever you wear, which are important, have a spiritual meaning to you or something. One must be careful. And when I see these ignorant people in the market, beating a drum or blowing in the trumpet, I'm always so flabbergasted, because they really don't know what damage that may do,
Before we move on, because you mentioned that this expedition is legendary, the Snow Lion expedition, will you say anything more about it? Like, what about that particular expedition made it legendary?
Well, actually, I have written a book about it, but it's not published. I'm now working on the last academic book, book publication, which I will bring out. And then I will devote myself to this sort of literary output now where I speak about such things as this Snow Lion expedition, which I call, it's in German, so I would have to rewrite it. It is between dream and reality or something like that. It is where this whole expedition was very much we were very much in a dream world, We were acting only of what we dreamed. We were guided by our visions and dreams, and at the same time doing an academic study. I did a whole statistic, which was quite valuable later on, which I could complete in later years. The aim of this expedition was on the basis of a text which was written around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century about all the temples and monasteries in central Tibet, what we call the Uri Parkour. This is a central mountain population. So our aim was to look for these places and search for them, and particularly find out what of the precious objects mentioned in this text are still there. Counting in each places, we went to the monks and the nuns and those who were in retreat or not, and also what sort of sacred objects were still there or were brought back. So later on, I did many more visits to Tibet. I always corrected the numbers and made new entries. So that was quite useful, particularly then for a later study, which I did on the psychic sports in Tibet. That was very useful to have these early numbers, but not only on the monasteries, but also on the nomads, the cattle breeders, how much cattle they still had, and so on. That was very interesting.
You've mentioned that before the 11th century, before the pre-monastic institutions really expanded, that tantric rituals were much more simplified. And I'm wondering if you would give some examples of that.
Well, I always thought that it happened in this period with the institutionalism of Buddhism in Tibet, meaning in the 11th century and 12th century, where all these big monasteries were built. But in later research, which is not yet in that book, but in some other, in my omnibus, it is written, I think in Boudica, yes, I found out that it already happened in India, the great monastic centers of Nalanda and Vikramashila. That was the time when the tantras, the tantric scriptures, were become part of the syllabus in the monastic universities. There, several abbots studied mainly on the example of Chakra Samvara, and there were mostly the abbots from Vikramashila involved to what I call execute a Baudelarization of the tantras. This term goes back to a person who, for the sake of his daughter or niece, this certain Baudelaire, has rewritten Shakespeare, because Shakespeare in many of his plays was using quite obscene language. So he did not want to spoil his virgin daughter or whatever she was, or niece. So that's what he did. He cut out all these passages. And that's what they did in Vikramashila as well, with the tantras, with the Chakrasamvara Tantra. For instance, there are two main things. One is that they cut out, put into the outer margin of the mandala only, the names of Brahmanical deities. Right? So they were there because when these root tantras first were orally, of course, only transmitted, there was not this difference between Buddhist and Hindu tantras, not at all, So we do have a lot of deities within the mandala, but names like Ishvara and so on, they were eliminated, And second, what also happened in Vikramashila is that they cut down the role of the woman in the tantras, right? So they also sort of made it less important as it is supposed to be. And that continued, of course, in Tibet, starting with Atisha, who was, as we know, so revolted. And when he came to West Tibet to see this misuse of rituals and misunderstanding of tantric rituals, they were a little bit out of their limits in their practices. having not proper guidance in those days due to Lang Dharma was also, the Buddhist historians say, has destroyed Buddhism in central Tibet. But still, the yogic lineages, the Ngakpa, the yogic traditions had survived very well in Tibet, even when the monasteries were all destroyed or locked down. No? So the tantric tradition was very much still alive. But when they then built these big monasteries, and we speak of a big monastery of Tigungtil, and then that was in 1100, and I have to look it up. I don't know exactly. A short 50 years later, already Tsurbu was built and so on. So there were these big monasteries built with many, many adepts, right? Many adepts. And they slowly changed. No? And even now, I honestly speaking, even in exile now in India, when I see these temples and how opulent again they are with gold and silver and precious and semi-precious stones and whatnot, I really wonder that they have not learned anything from history somehow. No, it's because these things can be destroyed. But anyway, I'm not really fond of all this pomp, right? So that's why they also because it's more precious, it's more important, then they used ivory instead of human bones, or they made this silver or silver inlays for the skulls. That's not at all in the tradition, right? But you see that at one point, of course, we can understand their devotion to offer only the best and whatnot, but somehow it's not the same. Or also the trumpets, it might be a human femur inside, but outer body is made out of some metal or silver and so on. And we don't need that. No?
Do you think we
So,
lose some of the power of the intention of it supporting,
well,
cultivating clear vision?
well, certainly
Intention.
because these are worldly things, and you get affected by that, by that splendor somehow, in my opinion. So impressive to go to these rich monasteries and their whole equipment and alone this brocade and silk hangings. Ah, amazing. Actually, all this is not necessary, but this is their way also to preserve. They say it's their culture and so on, which has to be preserved. In a way, it's true. On the other hand, I remember the Dalai Lama saying, I was for a conference in Naku that is in Kinnaur, in Himachal Pradesh, where there is a temple which was built in the 11th century by Rinzin Sangpo and Austrians in a UNESCO project for 10 years were conserving this old temple complex. And when that work was finished, there was a conference, and the Dalai Lama came and gave a Chakra Samvara initiation and whatnot. And all these village people came from far away, and it was wonderful, actually, to see all these different Himalayan people there. And then he graced also our small conference with his presence. And then when he sat down on the chair, not on the throne, which was prepared for him, and then he said, look, all this paraphernalia, all this, I written down every word, so I remember very well what he said. All this paraphernalia, all this equipment, all this and that, actually, it's useless. It is your job, so he sort of pointed out to us, experts, to preserve all that, and it's good to put it in a museum, right? That's good. But this is not actually what is our most important legacy. Is that the only thing, this is all, this is all just, stuff, right? Stuff. But what we really can contribute to the world, he said, we Tibetan Buddhists, what we really have preserved well, and what is the only valuable thing which we can, offer to the modern world, is our understanding of the interdependence, the interdependent origination of all dharmas, of all phenomena. Right? He said, this understanding, this insight, this wisdom, we have preserved well. And that is our contribution to the modern world with all its sciences and technologies. So I found it very interesting, you know.
Yeah. Very grounded wisdom for these times.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that is already another, that was 10 years ago anyway.
Well, just to speak about one of the ornaments, malas are one of the more common ritual ornaments that people are connected with. And you mentioned earlier this kind of, people showing their malas and that not being the appropriate thing or having other people touch them. And can you speak to how the material and the use can support different activities, if we're trying to magnetize or whatever the particular activity we're trying to encourage?
The so-called Bodhi seed mala, which is the safest, you may say, to use. And of course, you can find them in India easily. And they're also not expensive. So Bodhi seed is a safe thing to use always, right? But then you can go fancy if you want. And particularly the Chinese in Hong Kong and so on, they produce, and in Singapore, I've heard, they produce very fancy malas out of jade, jade, which would be good for doing green tara, for instance. It goes with the color. Or a crystal mala is good for Avalokiteshvara practice. Coral, I think, is good for Hayagriva, who is wrathful and red in color. And of course, you may also have nowadays they're very difficult to find, a genuine bone mala, human bone mala. It's very difficult to find nowadays because there are many fake in the sense that they are not genuine human bones, but they are buffalo bones, no? And all sort of camel bones. Camel bones is white in whiter than buffalo bone that gets, or donkey bones or whatnot they use. No? It gets rather yellowish. No? I still have my human bone earrings I read about in the book. I still have them, but keep them very safely and only use them at rare occasions because also they have now discolored and I don't want to lose them.
It's
So I
interesting what
keep
you
them.
said about the bone malas. That they were traditionally collected from 108 different people so that you wouldn't have too much of one kind of karma necessarily.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's right. It's not easy. No, it's not
Yeah.
easy. No? So you can make them out of skulls, but what I observed when I did my field study, they cut it out of the femurs mostly. Like this animal now or human. So that's a different technique. Because old malas are interesting because they have been used, no? For many, many years. Malas don't have this danger. There's not so much danger in using a mala than with other things. But most careful I would be with the bone trumpet.
You spent 12 years learning chod with Chatral Rinpoche, and he also instructed you on the proper way to handle instruments. And to begin with, how did you end up learning with him?
Well, first when I came, I received the initiation from Tujong Rinpoche in a very small circle. Small circle means there were not more than 5 people, including him. So that is actually the best. You need to have 5 people to complete the mandala. No? And then he sent me to Chatral Rinpoche to learn. No? So Chatral Rinpoche first, he sent me to a small nunnery in Chorepungalow, nearby, between Chorepungalow and Sonada, there it was. No? And there with these nuns, I learned to handle the bell and the drum at the same time. It needs practice. No?
What were some instruction that he gave you?
Chatral Rinpoche was also a very impulsive, extraordinary yogi teacher. And anyway, when one did something wrong, then he usually burst out in a temper. Whether he gave me these instructions or not, I cannot even say, no? But he made very sure that I learned it by heart. And then I had to, he examined me whether I know it. No? He did not really emphasize that I sing it in a very melodious voice because I'm a terrible singer and have no musical training at all. I see the only thing instrument I can play is the bong trumpet. So that was not the point. And also when I asked him regarding the dance, he said, you do whatever you want. You go wild. So no ritual steps or anything, he taught me. And then he just made me do it. He took me by his hand and to the jungle there. There was jungle there. And it was also in the evening. And he said, you never use any torch or candle or light source. No? It must be absolutely in the dark. And then you do your thing and never get up. No? Never run away. There's a certain posture and you need a belt or something. And all this actually, in the Kando Geyang, that particular practice which I mostly do, there is also detailed instruction how to walk, how to do, and so on in the commentary.
You were saying earlier that there's something very particular. We have to be careful with the actual bone trumpet.
Before you have to say Vajrasattva mantra, and then usually one puts also some water or some other liquid inside for the sound. Then you beat it on your palm, and there are certain melodies. There's invocation, and then there's offering, and then also to send them away, so that you call the spirits. That's why one should be careful. When you blow the horn, they come. So if you're not able to handle that, then there are problems. But it's a tantric practice after all. Now, when I see this beautiful, you see that also on YouTube, wherever, I don't know, in the West or also in India or wherever in the world, large assembly of nuns and monks and yogis and yoginis, they perform the chit in one voice and beautifully all, in harmony, That is great, of course, but this is not the way I was taught by Chatral Rinpoche, because he said, you just, you go wild. Because if you are not in a temple hall, with so many others, right? And maybe an audience even, but if you're just alone in the jungle or on the cremation ground at night, it's different. Particularly when you have, no light. You have to learn to see in the dark. And then, of course, as you invite, you are not inviting only spirits, you invite all sorts of creatures as well. So you have to deal with that. Snakes and scorpions and whatnot. They come out at night. And that's another thing what he told me, that is that you should not protect yourself. When you have protection cords or amulets, you should take it off. You should go naked, the best.
Did you have any experiences of scorpions or snakes and, in the midst of your practice? What did you do?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. 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 It happens.
Yeah. And so you just kept practicing.
Well, once you have this thought of that you may not die, that it's already over, no?
Right.
You have to remain absolutely. That's the only way to remain in that state, in the nature of your mind. That's the only way you can deal with it, no? Because if there's only a thought, then it's gone. It's not that it's always like that. I was once doing a very specific practice, a dzogchen practice, where one has to stand up and then has to fall on one's back. And I did that. It was always on the cremation ground. I did that for some time. It was going very well. But then suddenly I saw right next to me And, lying on the back like that, gazing at the sky, a very big, very, very, very poisonous kind of snake, And then I packed up. I didn't continue. It would have been too risky to continue that particular practice because it was combined with sound and this and that. I don't know. And anyway, I gave up. When I asked about that, one of my teachers, then he said, well, you probably have not started a ritual for asking permission to use that ground. So that is also an important thing, that you don't irritate all these spirits. So there, but on the other hand, when one gets used to that, one just has to be careful.
Being somebody that has spent so much time as a scholar and as a practitioner in ritual, in your daily life now, are you still doing, complex pujas, or are you somebody who is the essence of practice now? Or it sounds like you're less interested in elaboration and yet you like to do things properly. I'm curious where that is now in your life.
With that program with the Americans, that we had, our meditation sessions. There was master taught samatha and vipassana, and I was interested in that because I was never taught in the Theravada tradition, or Shravakayana, which I prefer the term. The samatha and vipassana, I only had it from our Mahamudra context, right? So I was interested in that, and then there was a Zen master coming to teach Zen, and I have done a lot of Zen meditation, so I like that, right? And so we had these regular meditations there. But usually for myself, I keep it very simple. I hardly use any texts except when there is the need. I hardly do formal practice at all. I have my little yoga thing, and I'm very much, and my pranayama, which I do, that is my main thing. And then I try to keep my awareness as much as possible in any situation, right? Sometimes I get carried away, and when I go to the cremation ground, of course, there I have obligations, right? And there is a need, because after all, where at the cremation ground, there are all these dead spirits and so on, and there it is very meaningful for them, to be in a state, in a meditative state, because that's what helps them. They feed on samadhi, they feed on your samadhi. So you better do it, it's the best offering you can give to them. And that is the only thing which really helps. Not crying, not this, not screaming. That's my reason also for going there. I get there more inspiration than from a temple, except places like Bodh Gaya, of course, are such, sacred sites, also in Tibet or so on. That's different. Otherwise, my place of meditation is always out in the open. I don't need a temple at all. Even in Bodh Gaya, I sit under the tree. Not on the actual Bodhi tree, because there are many people, but there's another Bodhi tree. Under that one, I sit. It's just my style, I'm like that, and I was 8 years in convent school when I was a girl, and so I'm a little bit allergic to too much.
When we see temples and all these shrines, there's such a focus on order and cleanliness and a certain idea of what purity is. And the charnel ground practice and being in a charnel ground, it seems like the antithesis. It seems so impure. When I'm curious if you could speak from the Tantra perspective of purity and how the charnel ground supports that.
There is no such a thing as purity or impurity. And that the cremation ground, which I always call the gate to liberation, these differences are obsolete, right? We mix with the doms. The doms are the one who burn the bodies, and they are outcasts, of course. They're not even low caste, they're outcasts. People would not even sit and drink with them, But we do. right? We mix with them. We mix with them. And one learns to appreciate what we call also the one taste, as in Mahamudra, the one taste. There's this story about that Sadhu Baba there in my cremation ground. He has passed away. No? So now he was a very learned person. Actually, from origin, he was a Brahmin. He spoke very well English. His name was Shiva Baba. And he had decided at a young age that he does not want to, to take over this as a zamindar, the property of his ancestors, but he wanted to go live on the cremation ground. And he did that all his life, came as a young man. So I enjoyed, of course, having these nice conversations with him. And as he was very learned and educated, it was a pleasure. But of course, he was also a bit mad, right? He had long dreadlocks and looked great. He had a tall figure and was good looking, old already. He was already in his 70s or something when I met him. And then he had this young apprentice, you may say. We called him the mad one, the Pagla. He was sort of squinted eyed, and so that was his guru. So he told me that himself, the Pagla. He told me that story. He said he wanted to test his guru. So he took a skull cup and collected whatever he could find. So he collected, he said, dog shit, then sweets, fruits, whatever he could find. And then from the cremation crowd, he cut the breast of a corpse, of a female corpse. And I think he even urinated in it or something. He put flowers and made it look nice. And then he offered it to his guru, to Shiv Baba. And Shiv Baba, he said, ha, 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 let me relish that. And he finished it all, So that's just an example how you go beyond your conventional limits of, what is pure and what is impure. That's the way it is at the cremation ground.
Were you sleeping at the cremation ground or just visiting for practice?
Well, in the beginning, there was only a small, simple mud hut, and where the Sadhuma and the Sadhu Baba, they stayed together, and I stayed also on the floor, on the mud floor, and under the feet of the Kali statue. And oh, there were rats, there were snakes, there were just everything. There was no light, there was no toilet, there was no water, nothing. It was wonderful, really. But then later on, Sadhu Baba, he passed away. Then Sadhuma was alone, and once I came, and that little hut was completely carried away by a flood. There's a river nearby. No? By the flood, he had nothing, nothing, absolutely nothing. So, and then I gave some funds, immediate funds, to build a simple house out of brick and a little bit higher up so it does not get flooded anymore. So there she was much better off. We built a well also that she did not have to draw the water from a neighbor ashram or from the river. And then made it even bigger, but that was unfinished. And then she also passed away. And then I continued. The roof was with bamboo and with plastic and, really had some tins that was in a very bad shape, very bad shape. So over the internet, I asked my friends and I posted also pictures that it needs repair. And I was able to collect some money. And with that, I could repair. And then my own funds also. And now it is rather comfortable. And then when I gave up my house where I used to stay for many years at the university in Chantiniketan, then I shifted my household affairs to the ashram. But then for that, I needed to install electricity. There was no electricity. No? So now we have electricity. Then I built a toilet also one outer toilet and a private toilet for myself with proper septic tanks.
What was it like being a woman living at the cremation ground? And were there many women, or were you one of the few?
Yeah, I wanted to speak about that. I've done some inquiries and research on that. There are not many women there. Some of them there are. I mean, that's how I came, because I had to find it this Sadhu Baba and this Sadhu Ma. So in those days, they were living as a couple, okay, till he passed away. And then she was living alone. And she did not allow any man to come inside the house. I mean, our little ashram. And I stayed with her off and on. In those days, I had the luxury that I could go and sit under the tree while she was doing all this, cleaning and cooking and all that. So I was free of that. And I could just, I had to come because she obliged me to interrupt, to come for lunch. But then I usually went back and I had my 8 hours. So that was a good arrangement. Then at one point, when I came, there was another sadhu woman, no, living with her. So I was wondering, that woman, I had to take some measurements. For instance, she bought a live chicken to kill it, and I immediately sent it away. And then she had another practice to cut herself and do blood offering, which is absolutely against our tradition. Absolutely not done at all. And then I inquired, and it happened that she was a destitute widow. And according to the Indian custom, she was thrown out of the house of her in laws. And there she had no other refuge. Now, the same story is about the sadhuma. When she told me her life story, it's more or less similar. That means she got her father was a rather, not rich, but well-to-do farmer. And she got married at a young age, according to the rural custom. And she must have been in her teens still. Then she gave a birth to a boy, and within 1 year, her child and her husband died. And of course, she could not go back to her family. It's not the custom. And then she had this dream. She had this dream that there will be a sadhu coming and knock at her door, begging, and she should go with him. Now, that was Karmapa. And Karmapa had a similar dream that he should go to such and such house and take this woman with him. You see? So that is very exceptional. But what does it say? It means that all these women, whoever they are, whether they wear the dress of a sadhu or a sadhuni, or whether they are spiritual or not, most of the time they are there because they were destitute. They had nowhere else to go. So this is rather different from the men. The sadhus, most of them whom I talked to, some of them had decided at a very young age not to marry and to become a sadhu, a wandering sadhu. So that is a different story. But the women I find mostly they're widows, no? And widows have no space in Indian society. So that was my observation. Well, now I'm a widow myself, but I have been there since the very early age. I was 20 when I came there. Of course, I saw that Sadhuma living alone, she was quite strict. She had her strict rules, and she did not allow those who want to drink and smoke ganja the whole day. She did not allow, right?
So that was rather strict. Now, and it was a sort of a, we may call it a female ashram. It was just her and me. And sometimes there were also women, but they didn't stay. They went away again. No? Like the one I told about. No? She didn't stay long. Then there was another one, another sadhuma. She later on moved to the temple complex and got a small setting there, where she stayed and then served another two, and she passed away also. Then we have, of course, the female bowls. That's a different story. Bowls are, we cannot call them pure tantrics. No? Some of them are mostly Vaishnavis. And of course, in the bowl communities, they're married. So that's about it. And I had in the beginning, after I was alone, hard time to change the atmosphere. It took a couple of years for me to get the respect which I have now, because there were all these young men always wanting money to drink this local liquor and smoking ganja the whole day. And I didn't like that. You know, from the beginning, it's always no, in the morning and non-stop. So I often had to dispute to with means with the broom or something, you know, to throw them out. Now it's much better, and I don't have this problem anymore. I keep a very strict discipline there. There's no other way, you know. They think after the demise of the Sadhuma, it was sort of common knowledge that you can hang out there and have a feast and smoke and drink. But what's that? That's not our ashram. No? So now it's okay. It's a couple of years, it's good. So you see, as a woman, it's not so easy, but after years, and they do know me afterwards, it's 50 years, and the young ones, they may have not even seen me in the early days, neither, but they have always seen me there. So they have grown up with my presence. It takes time. It's all a matter of time. But certainly what will not change in the near future is that those women you find, it's sort of sadhuma, they are often really, they had no other choice than to embrace the spiritual life. So very obvious.
So it sounds like your main experience has been in this one place too, like you weren't wandering other cremation grounds. So when you're doing charnel ground practice, you're in this one place where people have known you over decades.
I just came back yesterday because of this podcast. Usually I go every day to the cremation ground and see whether there are bodies or not, or even there are no bodies. That's even better. There are no burning bodies, because sometimes there are many people. Of course, I challenge myself, also wondering, am I doing the right thing? Is it really genuine what I'm doing? No, I question myself. I question myself. But this time I could provide again without any further trouble from these domes who run the bodies. Now I need them to deliver without any charges regularly this oil, you know, from the burning body, the oil, which I use for my lamp, you know, my offering lamp for Mahakala. So that's a good thing. So I managed to have a good deal with them. They are not, usually they were asking money for that, you know. But also they have want money for a skull or for bones. I said I will not pay. I told them also that if they sell it and they demand money for it, that is a very bad for them. You know, it's not auspicious, and it's a sort of bad karma.
You're getting the oil from these bodies to light your Mahakala lamp for practice.
Yeah, I get more and more demands. I cannot say, but people ask me to do certain things. There was terrible suicide I only received yesterday. I should do something about that. Then there was a healing ritual for an Indian family that in Austria. Fortunately, that was successful. Now I have some other people there in Bangalore. I don't know. They are sort of, I think there's some ghosts or something in their house. So anyway, if necessary, I have to fly to Bangalore and see myself. But if it's too much, I cannot solve all the problems of this world. It's impossible.
I guess as we close, what's most important to you right now with your energy?
And now is, of
Yeah.
course, when they ask me to do certain things, then I have to perform special prayers and rituals. So that is one thing that, of course, I want to have it, that it should be of benefit for them. And I'm not asking any money. Sometimes for these expensive fire rituals, I do ask for the expenses. Usually, it's the tantrics here in Bengal, they charge tremendous amount of money for that sort of ritual. If you go to Darabit, you can spend, they may ask you for, I don't know, $2,000, something like that. It's outrageous. I'm not doing that. I consider that to be not good. And then I try to remain in my natural state of mind. That's all, in the present.
Yeah.
I have certain projects to finish. I want to finish this last omnibus and half through. So I'm sitting there on my desk and work on that. According to my age, I take it easy. And not that I told you I'm not really into formal practice unless, there is some demands. When I go to the cremation ground, I do my Mahakala puja a little bit with tamaru and bell and all that because I like that. The spirits are there, the spirits are there.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Andrea, I want to invite you to listen to a conversation with Kulavadutta Satparananda. He shares his unusual journey from early spiritual visions to encounters with mortality and what those experiences taught him about letting go of every certainty we hold about life and self. You can find this episode linked in the show notes.